I'm a fifth generation Angelino. My son Jack, wherever he is back there, is a sixth generation. And my grandkids are seventh generation Angelinos, all from the west side. All from the west side. Come on, Bernie, find a seat. Okay. Larry and Martha were friends of my parents. Somewhere my dad befriended Larry years ago, and I grew up with this place. I watched him build it. When I was 17 years old, I emancipated and moved out. I was already in the music business. And it was a natural I came here. I used to crew on his boat when I was a kid. Here I am. Critter has been here somewhere between 48 and 50 years. I've been here a little longer, but he lived here steadily. I'd get married and move out, divorced and move back, married and moved out. I've done that a half a dozen times. But I've always kept it as either an office or a business a mailing address. So I've never lost touch with the place. We'll start with, I guess, a little bit about Larry. There's pictures and things on the wall that tell various stages of his life. Larry grew up in Glendale. His mother owned a rooming house, which burned down because of a gas leak. Larry was terrified of gas apartments. He started this in 1946, and so far as I know, it's probably the oldest all-electric building in apartments in LA. I don't know that for a fact, but I haven't read of anything that was all electric until the early 1950s. So, okay, back to Larry. Larry was born in 1905. When he was 17 or 18 years old, depending on which story he told you, he ran off to sail on a ship. He actually sailed, they still had sail ships in the early 1920s. And he'd sail up and down the coast to Seattle on lumber boats. And he actually sailed on 5-masted schooners. And the story that I remember and Critter remembers was he climbed a mast in Seattle to chip ice off the sails so they could return. Larry was not, that's 100 feet plus in the air. Larry was not afraid of anything except gas fires. He was that kind of a man. He enjoyed pain. It's weird, but the long roofed house was the first house Larry built. It was on Military near National. He lost it in a divorce, very bitter divorce, and there's plans for the boat. That was the first boat, the Gay Westerly, and Larry lived on that in the beginning until he met Martha. Then together they bought these two lots, combined them, and he started on this building. This building was built in a very unusual way. First of all, it was built modularly. The first apartment you'll see on the tour has an ice chest, not a refrigerator, just like he did on his boat. Then he built the unit above him, got that one rented. Then he came down and did this one, and then the front one. Larry had graduated from art school. Walt Disney in the early 1930s hired a lot of student artists from the art schools and to see who could be an animator and who couldn't. That was one of Larry's first animations before he went to Disney, I believe. Picked by Walt Disney, he was given the assignment in 1931, we think it was, that Mickey Mouse needed a new friend. The friend was to be a Russian sailor duck. His name was Donaldvich Duck. That's the reason that Donald sounds so funny. Now they use gas and make the voice man, I can't remember the name of it.
Helium?
Nitrous oxide, to make them talk funny. But originally they had a voice man who could do it. So Donald was supposed to be a Russian sailor duck. Larry had no idea what a Russian sailor duck looked like. So he went to the library and looked up a picture of Russian sailors. Little did he know that it was a Russian communist sailor duck that he was looking on, and nor did he know Walt Disney's legendary politics, and he drew Donald with a red star on his hat. Donald came downstairs after about 8 days and fired Larry personally. So that's the story of Larry's career as an animator at Disney. Yes, he was an animator at Disney, but it was very short-lived. Let that pass. He went to correspondence school. We found paperwork and stuff, and he actually learned mechanical drawing and engineer drawings, very specialized stuff. Later on, at the start of World War I, as you'll read up there, he went to Lockheed, and he was hired by Lockheed to work in what was called the Skunk Works, which was a top secret thing, and they brought people with very creative ideas into it. And he did a lot of jig work and mock-up work for them. Then he left that to go to Hughes, where he did the mock-up work on the Spruce Goose. So he was quite a craftsman in many fields. It was during that period that he built the house on Military. Living in the front apartment, Larry had arthritis in his ankles, very bad, and he had both feet almost cut off permanently. I can remember Larry in the early 1950s with stainless steel bolts coming out his legs, his ankles. So as a result, he had to stay pretty much confined to quarters. He couldn't really walk, but he'd stay in a chair for hours. To occupy his time, he did a lot of things. He tied knots and made rope doorknobs for some of the cabinets. Those are molds for cabinet hinges. A lot of the cabinet hinges he made out of wood. He hammered brass and made these cups. He didn't sit still. He worked on it and planned things. He ultimately started this building about 1952 or 53 and finished it, I want to say 1960, something like that. He stayed up there and he started work on this unit. This unit, the house, was originally a little clapboard bungalow, like the bungalow behind it. He was so fed up with the building department that he wasn't going to do another building from scratch. The only reason he got away with this one was it was the Korean War, and they waived a lot of zoning requirements and building requirements for housing. This house basically encapsulated the original clapboard house, and he just gradually over I don't know, 15 years, turned it into what it is now, one room at a time. Larry was not a person to think anything of spending 2 or 3 years like he did on the living room in that house. You know, when you see all the detail work, you'll realize. He also was very old school. I think he owned a power drill and a table saw, and that's about it in terms of power tools. He did everything with gouges, planes, hand measuring, braces and bits, planes. Oh, the clock is another thing he made while he was laid up. He liked to make clocks.
Hey Bob, tell me a little bit of their personalities and how they interacted, what kind of people they were.
They were exact opposites, that's why they attracted. Martha came from an entertainment industry background. Her aunt was the mother of Guy and Don McElwain. I don't know if you know who they were. Her cousins were the McElwain brothers. One was head of casting at Universal for a while, and the other one was the founder of Creative Artists. Martha, on the other hand, when MCA, Music Corporation of America, Lou Wasserman and Julie Stein started to take over Hollywood in 1946, was their first hire, and until she retired in about 1972 or 73, she was Lou Wasserman's private secretary. I don't know if anybody who doesn't know who Lou Wasserman is?
Lou Wasserman was a big deal.
They called him the last mogul. They called him the last super mogul. He founded MCA, which bought Universal. Okay, so she knew where all the ghosts were buried. One of my favorite stories, because of all of this, they knew what happened to a property when they allowed filming. And Larry wasn't one who wanted to do anything over unnecessarily, so they had a very strict no filming rule here. One year, see, it was the year of the 1970 Olympics, they took a cruise to Japan. They sailed everywhere. They very rarely took a plane. And they went to Japan for the World's Fair. Then they took another boat from there. And they were gone 6 months. While they were away, one of the tenants had graduated cinema school, and he filmed on the property Alice's Erotic Adventures in Wonderland. Larry found out and evicted him. An eviction by Larry was done very interestingly. He traveled by his own drum. He took the front door off and told the man that he couldn't put it back on, it was being repaired. If you were 3 days late, Larry would allow you 3 days. At the end of 10 days, you would have your door taken off. That was standard procedure here. If you played your music too loud, he'd bang on your car with his cane. Anything, if you had a question, he'd say, go see the boss, which was Martha. But the reality was, it was him behind the scenes. He just didn't want to cop out to it. Larry, after he built his boat, supplemented his income. He was a lobster pirate. Does anybody in the audience know what a lobster pirate was? Okay. Until about 20 or 25 years ago, you couldn't walk into every grocery store and buy fresh lobster. Lobster came chopped up and in a little frozen brick. They didn't have it in the markets like they do today. Lobster pirate is just what it sounds like. He'd dive in season or out of season, and he didn't care if it was in somebody else's trap or not. He would take it and take it fresh to the fancier restaurants and sell them. My very favorite story, I don't remember how old I was. I think I was about 13 or 14 actually. And we'd gone sailing to Catalina, and it was my birthday. So they told me to bring nice clothes. When we got home, they were going to take me to a special place. Well, they did. They took me to Romanoff's. Does everybody know what Romanoff's was? Romanoff's, for those who don't, was behind the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, and it was opened in the 1930s, and it was there until the late 1960s. And it was owned by a man named Count Mike Romanoff, who was neither a count nor a Romanoff. But he played himself in a lot of movies, and a lot of movies were filmed there, and it was the place for the big, big stars. So they took me to Romanoff's. We were standing in line, and Count Mike came out. He was a little short guy, and he came up, "Oh, Mr. Larry, you shouldn't have to wait in line." And he took us in, and he gave us the nicest table there. We were there maybe sitting 10 minutes, and Gary Cooper, the actor, came in. Gary Cooper looked down, saw us at his table, whistled up Count Mike, and said, "Mike, what are these people doing at my table?" Cooper was very tall. As I said, Mike was very short. He's looking up at him. "You don't understand, Mr. Cooper. Without Mr. Larry, there'd be no lobster." The end result was Gary Cooper not only bought me a drink at that age, but he sat down at the table and had dinner with us. Larry was totally, he was a man's man. He was rugged. He did a lot of things. On the other hand, he enjoyed the opera and the ballet more than just the average passion. And they would go to the opera. They would buy season tickets and go every year. They'd go to Europe for tours of the operas in different cities. It was very interesting. Martha, on the other hand, we went to San Francisco one time. Does anybody out there, have they ever heard of a nightclub that's gone in San Francisco called Finocchio's? Okay, well, it was a cross-dresser transvestite bar and club, and they had a show. We got thrown out of the place because Martha was unladylike. Martha had some very interesting ideas about animal cruelty and how animals suffer through their life and shouldn't be born. Martha's passion, especially in later years, was she'd drive around with one of her friends and they'd grab people's cats and take them and have them fixed at her expense. And she got in trouble for that quite a few times. I think she holds the record for a number of attempts. I don't know if you're aware of the ownership of this property. Martha left it up in trust to the cats, basically. The last of the cats has long since passed, so the money, the residual income, now goes to, I believe it's the Doris Day Animal Foundation. They had no children, and that's how we're part of the LA Conservancy. And
I call myself Turtle Mom, Bob is Turtle Dad. So we're the ones that take care of the turtles. They go crazy this time of year when there's food out there. It's a lot of fun, and the kids really love to see them, so we're doing that kind of as a community service. So that's the story of the turtles. If you know anybody who needs to get rid of a red-eared slider, you can either get in touch with us or just plop it in the pond. I'm like, you're a new turtle, I don't recognize you. There's two kinds of turtles in there. There's red-eared sliders, that's the majority of them. I think speaking of old school, anybody knows Woolworths, you know, I used to get them there. You can still get small ones in Chinatown, which technically is illegal. But anyway, that, and then the other kind is a western pond turtle, which I found that out by going to my Turtle Society meeting going, name this turtle, I have no idea what kind it is. So
don't forget the golden turtles.
There's golden turtles, right? I think what we've got like
Two of them.
Two in that pond, two in this pond.
2 and 2. So yeah, so you can be like, you know, challenge the kids, like look for the different species.
They
of
get
turtles,
along good
right?
together.
And stuff. So yeah, so we're at a turtle house here too.
Thank you, too.
Did he have help building?
No.
He did it all himself?
Larry did it all himself. The big beams were done with block and tackle. Oh, that's something I should mention. All these pier pilings were World War II surplus that were laying on the beaches that he'd tow home. He had a Jeep with a winch on the back, and he'd tow it. These big tree things, he towed those with his boat from the Channel Islands, pulled them up on shore, followed the railroad tracks in his Jeep, and brought them in. He did it all by himself. He laid every brick, cut every pane of glass. When he was building this house, I went to Tijuana twice to buy him glass. He cut it all himself, made all his own windows. He had no help. He did it one man. But he started it in 1946, worked on it the next half a century. He was too old and feeble to finish.
Yeah, I've heard some very interesting people have lived here over the years. Can you comment on that?
Sure. When I first moved in, my neighbors across the hall in the upstairs unit were Paul Apprentice and Dick Benjamin. This little skinny door was Nick Nolte's when he was still a screenwriter. The upstairs back apartment was most of you are probably too young to know who she was, but it belonged to Zazu Pitts. Frank Zappa wrote a song about her, by the way, and she lived there the last 8 or 10 years of her life, something like that. Then when she passed away, the next tenant was Gwen Verdon. And Gwen Verdon left to marry Frank Sinatra, and it didn't happen. Then he threw her over for Juliet Prowse, and then Dorothy Provine, and then he stole Barbara Marx from Groucho. The back little apartment, the first one you'll see on the tour, there's a whole article there. The Frank Sinatra Jr. kidnapping took place there. So we have 2 ties to Frank Sinatra, and actually a third one, because when I got out of high school, one summer I worked to save money to go to Europe by myself on my own, and I answered an ad for an attorney named Gladys Towels Root. And what happened, she had me running Ritz, which is a whole nother story in itself. But she had me one day, her chauffeur was sick, and she asked me to pick her up at the airport. And she told me to go to her house and get her limousine and pick her up at the airport. And I did. And then she says, I think we're being followed. She lived on Murfield Drive in Hancock Park, and you would go Century to La Brea and up. She said, take Sepulveda and angle up Lincoln. And if I tell you to or kick the seat, go as fast as you can. So I did that. And sure enough, she says, we're being followed. And she starts kicking the seat. I punch it. A station wagon pulled up, and a guy put 3 rifle shots into the side of the car. Old Blue Eyes sent a message. She was defending the kidnappers. And I quit. She felt very bad about that, and she actually got me another job working for another show business legend. His driver was sick for a while, so I worked all summer for Greg Boutzer.
I don't think everyone knows who he is.
He was married to Dana Winter. He was the big Hollywood playboy in the late 30s and 40s. He was pretty legendary. His firm was Wyman, Boutzer, Rothman, and Kiko. He had 2 senators in his firm.
And also, am I right, Bob Dylan lived here?
No,
He visited. I know there was something about Bob Dylan. Critter told me.
Critter worked on Bob Dylan's. Okay. We'll get one more story. Claire, this is going to run over. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Just 2 more minutes.
As I mentioned earlier, Larry and Martha didn't move into the bay window apartment right away. They rented it out. The Munchkins, people don't realize this, the space over the Akasha restaurant was the Munchkins' rehearsal studio during the filming of Wizard of Oz. I went to high school with a girl whose mother was the choreographer, and that was her studio before she built her own on La Cienega. The Munchkins were pretty much local. They didn't really all live in the Culver Hotel. Most of them lived in the Green Hotel on Melrose. They had actually, I remember going in there, a friend of mine told me about it, and I had to go see it. They had furniture that they had all the legs cut off for the little people. It was an interesting hotel, but most of them lived there, but a lot of them lived in Culver City. You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you. And thank everybody for coming. This is number 1 on the tour. This is the very first unit that Larry built for him and Martha to live in it as he built the rest of the building. This back building was built, he started it in 1946, and he finished the entire building about 5 years later, 6 years later. They lived in this unit, one little room and a bathroom, and it was the first actually modularly built unit. It stood freestanding, and then the rest of the building was gradually added onto one room at a time until it was completed. As you look across the room and to the right diagonally from the door, There's an ice chest built in. That was his only means of refrigeration. It's an old boat ice chest. He and Martha lived in this apartment for several years. They didn't have a stove, and they had a barbecue outside, and that's how they survived for the first year until he's got more built. If you look, everything is built in, all the cabinets. It's like a cabin on a boat. If you look closely at these little nooks and crannies in the corners, Larry, rather than lose space in the wall space between studs, he doubled and in some instances triple studded the walls so that they could have little spaces to store things. He didn't waste an inch, just like on a boat. The walls are fairly straight and conservative in this unit. His style hadn't quite evolved, but if you look closely, you'll see that all the hinges are made out of wood. The door latch is wood. There's a little desk built in. The downstairs little single units all have concrete floors that he etched by hand to replicate tile so that it looks like terracotta. Electric heating, electric water heater. In 1946, these were all electric units. His mother had an apartment building in Glendale that burned down because of a fire from a gas heater, and everything he built was all electric. This is unit number 2 in the tour. This is very much similar to the one that Larry and Martha built to live in as the first unit. This is actually the 3rd unit to be constructed, but number 2 on the tour for convenience sake. Again, all the latches are made out of wood. All the hinges are made out of wood. This unit's a little smaller. It's only about 115 square feet. This was Nick Nolte's unit when he was a screenwriter. He lived here for 2 years. He didn't drive, he walked to MGM. Larry's style is beginning to come out. If you notice, the upper beams are cut in curves, so you get the illusion of the room being rounded as a ship is. There's little pegs and stanchions and things holding a lot of fake beam work as well as real beam work. And the style is just beginning to come out. This room has very little squareness to it. Again, all the cabinets and features are built in. There's a desk here built in cabinets. There's no kitchen, there's no refrigerator. Almost everybody sooner or later trips over that step. That step, to keep it from flooding. We're below ground level. The original slab was poured for the whole building when he constructed it, and it was for the garages. And the elevation's totally different there than here. Larry also did something that was rather unique. He knew he was doing a building with a lot of wood. He had several truckloads of salt dumped before he poured the cement. Salt kills termites. Okay, this is unit number 3 in the tour. And at the point that, as I had said earlier, Larry constructed these modularly. He built one unit at a time and completed it and rented it out and then built the next and the next. He designed this one for he and Martha to live in. So he designed this, to look down on the courtyard and eventually look at the other building. You can see his style starting to come out. This is the first of the floors he built. And you'll see it's somewhat straight, but just curves off to one direction. It is pegged. It is 1-inch decking. The table folds down and slides against the wall. The benches go under it and they nest. You can see in the ceiling how Larry roughed the wood to simulate antique wood. Again, the staining of the walls, where it's darker at the edges and lighter in the center, the picture frame staining. The castings, Larry cast those hinges himself. We have the molds for them. He made his own molds and cast those. That was all done during the time he was laid up. He lived in this apartment when he was laid up after his foot surgery, and there was 6 months he couldn't walk, but he could do things with his hands, so he did a lot of little craft details, such as the snake and the fish on the door. Everything built in, just like a ship, lots of little hatches and storage areas. These drawers are extra wide and extra long because Larry would not waste space. It's just like a boat. The water heater is behind the mirror. And so that's all the space behind the water heater. They rented the apartment out for 6 months while they were away. A couple of the Munchkins from The Wizard of Oz rented it, man and a wife. And what they did is they slept in the bedroom, and they rented several of these drawers out to other Munchkins who used them as beds. And the result was that one of the Munchkins actually fell asleep smoking a cigar, and they had a minor fire up here in the drawer. And the fire captain who came out, Captain Matheson, fell in love with this place, befriended Larry, and he built his home further down Overland, and it looks like this, very similar. Then that led Matheson to, when he retired from the fire department, he formed Matheson Construction. In 1969, roughly, I had a Christmas party, and Lou Adler came. And Lou wanted Larry to build his house at Malibu, and Larry didn't, but he said, I know just the person who can, and that was Matheson. Then as a result, they did work on Barbra Streisand's home, they did work on Bob Dylan's home, and they rebuilt Gene Kelly's home when he had the fire and it burned down. The horizontal beams are strictly decorative, and Larry fashioned them and made them look like real. It used to be, they'd oil all the wood and everything. Every time a tenant moved out, this place would be detailed. And this hasn't been oiled and done right in at least 15 or 20 years. So the beams are drying out a little bit, and you're beginning to see some cracks. This is unit number 4 on the tour. It's actually the second apartment that Larry built. First thing I wish to point out, if you notice, the window seats run the length of the windows. There's also a little built-in desk that's quite interesting. The curved cushions under the red light sconce have storage space beneath the seating. For sure. There are tiny cabinets in the corners of the room, if you will notice. This is one of the nicer kitchens here, and one of the largest in this building, and probably the best laid out kitchen on the whole property. Little corner dining table built in, breadboards built in, a few little details in the woodwork over the sink. Again, all the hinges and latches handmade, towel bars. I want to point out again here that this is an all-electric kitchen built in 1946, probably one of the very earliest. And it was because Larry's mother lived in Glendale and owned an apartment building, and it burned down. And he was deathly afraid of gas stoves and gas fires. So he did everything all electric. If you look at the ceiling, you'll see another example of Larry's imagination. It's an open beam ceiling. Tips slightly with the roof. The boards, there are right angle junctions and things. The upper, what's the word, lath, is all hand gouged. He spent a lot of time on that. This would be number 5. When I first moved into the apartment across the hall from this unit, my neighbors were Paula Prentice and Dick Benjamin. They lived there for roughly 2 years. You can see how the floors radiate. If you look at the furniture in this apartment, again, it's that 1930s Popeye and olive oil type style, exaggerated legs that look like they could dance. Again, everything is built in. The sofa's built in. He didn't waste any space. Lots of little cabinets, lots of little hatches everywhere. These cabinets were designed to hold a stereo and a television. The pattern is Royal Stewart, which was his family's tartan, or so he said. Originally, Martha had made matching curtains, so all the apartments had that wallpaper, and they had curtains that matched. Over here is a desk. Notice how the drawers all work and pivot out. Black forest wood doors. More cabinets. Even the cutouts for the lights. This is fun too. These are the original refrigerator and freezer. Again, the kitchen is like a little ship's galley. Again, all electric. His fear of fire. Even the double hinges. And he used 2 colors of wood to peg them. Just everywhere you look, there's lots and lots of little details. The table would go up, there's benches under it that nest to pull out. There's space, that's for the refrigeration units for the kitchen, but it's storage space. That opens up. Both upstairs apartments have that. But I went up to change a light bulb, and I had climbed up, and I fell down and knocked myself out, and Martha found me. This is the final home of Larry and Martha. The door, if you can get a close-up of the wood, is kind of interesting. There was a printing company located around the corner from here, and they had 2 German Heidelberg presses that they had bought in the early 1950s. And when they arrived, Larry took the crates and kept them. This is all what he called his German black forest lumber. It's all oak. It was all used to shift the printing presses. And all the doors in this house were made from Heidelberg wood from their printing presses. As you can see, even the exterior, all this hand detail is to make it look worn. All the wood is picture frame dyed. It's darker around the edges and lighter in the center to give the illusion of age. This is a 2-bedroom house with a bonus room. As you can see, this is the final floor that Larry built, and differs from the other wooden floors in that it's really extremely curved. Larry designed this light fixture so that only he could walk under it. It was made to his height, and he delighted in taking people in to show them the house, and he'd walk under it and they would walk right into it. That's why we have a foam on it, to protect people from hitting their head, but that was one of his in-the-house jokes. Again, you can see all the furniture is built in, all the hinges are wooden and handmade. There's hidden cabinets under all the love seats. In the mantelpiece is where the stereo and stuff is all laid out. The speakers are in the ceiling, hidden. He built every light fixture in here, built the fireplace and the chimney outside. He sand cast the dome cap on the chimney that's outside. This is one of his desks. If you look at the stools, they're a good example. They look like this furniture, everything is curved and swept out that he built and exaggerated like a 1930s cartoon picture, but he made all his furniture to look like that. This is another Black Forest wood door. He handmade the brass handle for the door, but it does have the usual wooden latch. Originally, these were gimbal lamps, but over the years, they've broken to pieces. We still have them. Eventually, they'll be restored, and the ship's gimbal lamps will go back there. This was the bedroom that Larry built for himself. Woodwork's quite spectacular. He didn't live to finish this room. These were going to all be mirrors. Larry would sleep on that couch. He actually died on that couch. Again, if you look under the bed, there's hatches. There's little secret hatches everywhere in this house. Now, Larry had passed away roughly 25 years before the present tenant moved in, and when we cleaned the apartment for him to move in, they still found money that Larry had hidden in some of the hatches. No space lost. All the drawers go into the wall. This is the bathroom. All Venetian tile. Originally, there were live plants hanging over, ferns over that. Then, this room has a story. Martha's bedroom. Originally, the first bedroom was all dark wood and something like Larry's bedroom, and she objected to it. She wanted something white and light. So he knocked everything out and rebuilt this room again. This is the result. Totally changed it. Larry spent, let's see, from about 1970, he moved into the house in 74. He spent roughly 4 years doing this area alone. Spent over 4 years building this area. You know, he did all the windows, he did everything. If you notice, the floors are pegged. And again, there's hatches under all the love seats. And he built every light fixture. There's another fun thing, is Larry's kitchen. See how the cabinets are at an angle? That was to bump Martha on the head. The upper cabinets originally hit him on the head, and he resented it, so he fixed it so they'd hit her on the head. One of my favorite stories, when they went shopping, he'd buy lots of canned goods, because they'd go on their boat and sail. He took all the labels off of all the cans and mixed them up. So it was you'd never know what you were going to have. The meals would not get boring. He had a wicked sense of humor. I went to Mexico, to Tijuana, twice in the late 1960s just to buy glass for him. He didn't want to stop working on the house, but he told me what colors and what he wanted, and I'd bring back glass and he'd cut it to shape and fit, himself. But when you figure that one front of the mantle, that's all hand gouged. Every one of those cuts was by hand and with a purpose. Same with the beams. These are a blend of real beams and fake beams. You can't tell. He was a master. Oh, he could work wood like it was clay.